Live Unrehearsed on CJAD 800. Brought to you by Marco Vendramini of IG Private Wealth Management. MarcoVendramini.com.
Welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Corey Sirota, grief, loss, and bereavement specialist, and I'm with Matt Delvecchio, free retirement home search and senior transition specialist.
Corey, as mentioned before the news, I had the opportunity to interview Theo Fleury. This was an interview done about a couple of weeks ago, and let's listen into that. All right, on the line we have Theo Fleury calling from his hometown of Calgary. Theo, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Theo, quite an NHL career, over 1,100 games if we include regular season and playoffs, 1,100 points, a little more than that. Stanley Cup champion in 1989. Regrettably, I have to say you hoisted that cup on the Montreal Forum ice. That hurt us for us Montrealers, but Stanley Cup champion, gold medal Olympic champion in 2002. But your life, Theo, is so much more than that. In 2009, you released an autobiography called Playing with Fire. It instantly became a bestseller, and the book was a tell-all documenting everything from your substance abuse and addiction, and revealed that you had been repeatedly sexually abused when you were a teenager by former hockey coach Graham James. I guess it's fair to say, Theo, you reached rock bottom in 2004 when you contemplated suicide, and I can't imagine your frame of mind at that time, but could you tell us about what happened in that very moment?
Well, I'd obviously struggled with, lots of mental health issues and, addiction issues and basically was at the end of my rope because, I'd lived most of my life in emotional pain and suffering. And, up until that point, I guess I tried everything on the planet I could to, get rid of all this pain that I had been in. And, I really didn't want to live in that kind of pain and suffering anymore. And so, I went down to a local pawn shop in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I was living at the time, and purchased a gun and some bullets, and went home and put the gun on the coffee table, poured out a whole bunch of cocaine, grabbed a bottle of vodka, drank probably a third of the vodka, and chopped up a whole bunch of lines, snorted a bunch of lines, and sat back and sort of reflected on my life and all the good things that happened, all the horrible things that happened were like a movie playing in my head, and finally got up enough courage and grabbed the gun, loaded the gun, put the gun in my mouth, and still this movie was playing in my head, and right at the moment of truth, it was time to pull the trigger and end my life. This random thought came into my head, said, you've never quit anything in your life. Why are you quitting now? And that was the turning point. I immediately, took the gun and threw it into the desert and started this comeback in life and trying to figure things out.
We talk about that comeback in life, and we're talking with Theo Fleury, ex-NHLer, Stanley Cup champion, and now an advocate and motivational speaker for those suffering with mental illness, addiction, and trauma. Theo, if you look back in time, what were some of those major events for you to pick up the pieces and start fighting?
Well, I think the first thing I needed to do was to get sober, and in September 18th, 2005 was the last time I had a drink or a drug, and that was the beginning, to thinking clearly and starting to feel the actual feelings that I was feeling, and then finding, the right community and the right bunch of people to, start having this conversation. And I think the writing the book in 2009 was really the sort of the catalyst for all of it, and it's been nothing but a self-seeking mission ever since then, and through working with other people who struggle with trauma, mental health, and addiction. I've really been able to, heal myself through that platform.
And let's talk about that book launch in 2009. You started a book tour. Something happened in Toronto at the book signing, and which was a bit of a revelation for you. Can you tell us about that?
Well, when I sat down to write the book, I wasn't going to talk about any of this stuff. I was just going to talk about my hockey career, and early on in the process, the lady that I was writing the book with, I trusted her, and, she made me feel safe. And, 3 years later, we finished this book. I don't leave anything out. And what was really kind of interesting was, 4 days before I was headed to Toronto to launch this book, I was really apprehensive, and I was afraid. I was scared because, I didn't know how, the public was going to react to what was in the book. And not only that, I knew I was going to go do a whole bunch of media, and I knew that the only thing that the media would be interested in would be to, re-victimize me over and over again. And so basically I spent, those 4 days before I went to Toronto on my computer researching everything I could find on the subject of sexual abuse, because I knew really nothing about it. And so when I got to Toronto, I had a lot of information, and, I wanted to get a story of hope and healing and recovery out to the masses, and, I was able to accomplish that. And then the next thing was the first book signing, and I didn't have a whole lot of expectations. I didn't think that anybody was going to read the book, and so I show up at one of the biggest Indigo chapter store in all of Canada, and I walk through the front door, and there's 400 people standing in line with my book, and I'm like, what are all these people doing here? Why are they here? And so I started signing books, and out of the corner of my eye, I spot this guy in line, and he's got my book clutched against his chest. His face is buried in the floor, and he's walking really slow. And I sort of said to myself, I wonder what's up with that guy. And so I follow him all the way in the line, and he gets to the front of the line. He puts the book on the table, looks me in the eye, and says, "Me too." And, that's, the rest is, sort of history. And he was the guy that came to that book signing and delivered a spiritual message of 2 simple words that, changed my life and gave me purpose. And like I said, I haven't stopped since 2009, and that's 10 years ago. And we've been able to inspire and provide hope and guidance, to a whole generation of people who, like I said, have had the same experiences as myself.
Well, it's Theo Fleury talking to us. And Theo, we're going to, if you don't mind, go head out for a quick traffic update. But when we come back and you talk about spreading the word, and that Me Too has turned from one person to thousands and 500,000, I think over 1 million people you've mentioned. But, I think people listening right now may be suffering from or know someone who's suffering from trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse, or mental abuse, and they may tend to put it off. We'd like to hear from you of what you could recommend, what words of advice that you can do starting today. But let's first head to the CJAD Traffic Center.
Live Unrehearsed on CJAD 800. Brought to you by Marco Vendramini of IG Private Wealth Management.
Fleury, ex-NHLer, With over 1,100 games in the NHL, Stanley Cup champion and Olympic gold medalist, Theo is now an advocate and motivational speaker for those suffering with mental illness, addiction, and trauma, including sexual abuse. I know, Theo, we didn't talk hockey at all, but in my little research, a little known fact of your NHL career, I had no idea. You won the NHL Plus Minus Award with a plus 48 and 91. Pretty impressive, Theo.
Well, that's what happens when you score 50 goals, I guess. So.
Well, good on you. Theo, just before traffic, I mentioned that we need to seek out your advice. There are people suffering in silence. You see it every day. You're on the road more than 200 days a year, talking to people, guiding people. And it's either someone listening to us right now or more than likely someone you may know. And we say one day, we'll get help, but it doesn't happen. So, Theo, what can you recommend to people starting today to get help?
Well, I think it all starts with a realization that, I can't live my life like this anymore. And, it's causing damage in, not only to myself, but to my relationships and the people that I'm close to, et cetera, et cetera. And, I think the first step in the process is, finding your voice and using your voice to talk about, what happened to you, but that needs to happen in a very safe, vulnerable environment. And once you get to that point, then, you just have to keep going and unpacking, the layers of trauma that you've experienced in your life so that, it's no longer a burden and it's no longer a secret. We have this saying that, you're only as sick as your secrets. And there's no question that, I was one of those people that was carrying around secrets and, I was sick physically, emotionally, spiritually, all that stuff. And, when I found my voice in 2009, that's when, I started down a path of, understanding the trauma and, unpacking the trauma and then getting to a place of, compassion, vulnerability, forgiveness, self-love, self-forgiveness, all these wonderful things that, we aren't taught or we don't even think about. And it was by doing the work that I'm doing that I ran into, millions of people who shared this similar experience, and just by talking and sharing and being open and honest and like I said, vulnerable, was how I healed and continue to heal. And so many people, think that that you can be healed from something like this, and I think there's no such word as healed when we choose a path of self-discovery. It's a continuum for the rest of our lives. And I often say I'm in therapy for the rest of my life, and I'm completely okay with that, because every time I enter into a healing relationship, that I just continue to get better and better, and so it's not rocket science. It's about being in relationship with people that you can share this stuff with, and when you do that, that's when the continuum of healing happens.
We're talking with Theo Fleury, ex-NHLer, Stanley Cup champion, Olympic gold medalist, and now, as you hear, an advocate and motivational speaker for those suffering with mental illness, addiction, and trauma. I love the term unpacking the layers of trauma, Theo, because it's not a magic pill that's going to fix things. It's one at a time. And you talk about your days of sobriety, September 18th, 2005. That's over 13 years ago, and I believe you like not counting by years, but by the day. And I did a little calculation. Over 4,800 days, this year in 2019, you'll reach 5,000 days. And why do you like doing it by days and not years?
Well, because, I think the idea of healing is, to live in the present and to live in the moment, and when we do that, I think life is a lot more easier and manageable, is that when we take it 24 hours at a time, we don't think about the past, and we certainly don't dwell on the future, and it keeps us, in a state of less anxiety, less depression, et cetera, when we just try to live, moment to moment, and so far, that's worked for me, and so, I think that it's very difficult for a lot of people to achieve sobriety one day at a time, because they either live in their past, which is what I did for the majority of my life, or continue to play the role of victim. And, we get ourselves in a position to be overwhelmed where we can't manage, the anxiety or, the depths of depression when we are in that space. And so, breaking it down to, second to second or moment to moment or 24 hours at a time, for me has become the most effective way of, living, a sober life, a healthy life, is, by just trying to be present as much as possible, which is not, an easy thing to do, but, I have a daily routine now that, like I said, has worked for, like you said, 4,800 days.
Amazing. It really is. Theo, we're already out of time. I want to thank you so much for joining us on Life Unrehearsed. I don't know too many people that would personify the words Life Unrehearsed more than you. We want to thank you for your courage and inspiration, and could only wish you continued strength and perseverance in doing what you're doing to help others. Thanks again, Theo.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much as well. That was incredible, Matt. Really heartfelt. Next week on Life Unrehearsed, Tariq Ryman, author of The Camino Within, is going to teach us how to break out of our comfort zone to become successful.
And Belle, Let's Talk Day is coming up. We're going to talk to mental health advocate Liz Weiner, who understands the challenges of living with a mental illness firsthand.